Hello and welcome to the Holyrood Sources podcast, where we take you inside Scottish politics. I'm Calum Macdonald, and this is Geoff Aberdein, who was Chief of Staff to the First Minister Alex Salmond. Hello, Geoff.
Good morning.
And Andy Maciver, who was Director of Communications for the Scottish Conservatives. Hello, Andy.
Good morning.
On the podcast today, Andy goes viral. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Plus, Stephen Flynn will certainly not be double jobbing because it's just been banned by MSPs. So a mention of that too. Just to say that you can watch all of this on YouTube. Search for Holyrood Sources, where we upload clips and actually full episodes for you to enjoy. And we are not far away. Let me do the maths. We are 37 subscribers away from 500 on YouTube, which we'd love to get to before Christmas. So that's a week's time. Wonder if you can help us out with that. Go and have a little search for Holyrood Sources on YouTube. You can watch back full episodes, including last week's episode, which had some insight on how to talk to world leaders like Donald Trump, for example. Go and have a watch of that. Right, let's have a look at some of your WhatsApps that have come in over the last week. Thank you for these. You send them, we read them on the next episode, and the number is 0333 404 6507. Let's start with this one from Tim on the rise of reform. He's been listening to our episode from a couple of weeks ago with Martin Green from Reform UK. He's their Scottish campaign director. Tim says, Johnson Truss have made the Tory party unelectable in the short term. Labour offered a mirage, but zero strategy, which the country bought. As a public servant, I feel UK-wide people are scunnered with what we offer, and in Scotland the battle will be between a Musk, Farage, Tory rump and the devolutionist SNP. Where is the hope? Where are the big ideas? Asks Tim, that Geoff's laughing at.
Tell us what you really think, Tim. I disagree with him, incidentally. Andy and I were doing a get-together. We were moonlighting, Calum, for an organisation doing a political update, the two of us. And I made this point. I mean, there's now enough analysis to show, particularly with reform in the by-elections in Scotland, that they are taking votes from the Conservatives most of all, but they are also taking a decent chunk from Labour. And it does seem that it's marginal where they're taking votes from the SNP. So the fundamental analysis of Tim is correct. You're going to have this kind of cabal of the Tories, Reform and Labour on one side potentially, and Reform could be the poison pill for them, and the SNP on the other side that might be able to kind of go through and win the election on a reduced popular vote. You can see that scenario as things stand. So I think he's actually made a very good point. But the scunner factor is absolutely right, and I'm sure we're going to get into that in the podcast. But I think this folk just completely disillusioned with the body politic across Scotland and the UK just now.
I mean, Tim is, I think, right in a global sense to be concerned about that sort of thing. And this is not me saying, oh, but Scotland's different. But it is me saying, but Scotland's slightly different for this election, at least, because the least likely party to be in government after the next election in Scotland is Reform, and the second least likely party to be in government is the Tories. So far more likely the government will comprise of a combination of the SNP, Labour and the Lib Dems, or 2 out of 3 of that sort of combination. And if people are absolutely, utterly desperate, then potentially some involvement from the Greens. It's only after that anybody will start to look anywhere. I mean, look, I know that we say things will never, ever happen until they happen, but really, 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 the SNP and Labour are never, ever, ever going to get into any sort of deal with Reform or the Tories. That is not going to happen.
Yeah. I like the interesting use of the word mirage of Labour, which I think we'll come back to in a little bit. Actually, just at the mention of Reform UK, the Daily Record front page today, Nigel Farage's Reform Party organiser in Scotland has been sacked after a record probe into his family's links to a loyalist terror plot. I'm reading from the record. Craig Campbell was removed as Scottish organiser of the right-wing party after the paper revealed his late dad was a UVF commander who was jailed following the bombing of Catholic pubs in Glasgow. His cousin was also jailed after murdering a Celtic fan. The man, Craig Campbell, is referred to in this article as a rising star of Reform. He also had images on his Facebook which compared the SNP to the Nazis. A Reform UK Scotland spokesman said Craig Campbell is no longer a Reform UK Scotland organiser. Reform UK Scotland will not tolerate discrimination of anyone in any form. And it's not known, it's worth saying, this is an additional bit, it's not known of Campbell's family ties were known to Nigel Farage or party bosses, which arguably, Geoff, is the important payoff there, is the fact that they didn't know.
Yeah. And look, and for those regular listeners who listen to our pod with Reform UK recently, this is the point I was making. The minute that you try to establish infrastructure, party branches across the country, corral your members, you're always going to have issues like this. Every political party has it, and you could argue with the nature of reform, it's even more likely they're going to have these issues. It's the first of many stories of this ilk, I'm sure. Whether they really cut through or not is the point, and only time will tell on that basis. But this is exactly the sort of thing that happens when you're establishing a political party.
Yeah. Right, onwards. We've been asking for your politician who's stood out in Scotland over the last year and your political moment of the year. And I'm sure the very clever and astute among you will realise this is for one of our special Christmas episodes. So you'll hear more about this next week. But Francis has been in touch, and actually this is topical, so let's do this. Francis says, Dear Calum, Geoff and Andy, thank you for an interesting year. The politician standing out for me this year is Humza Yousaf, with his unrelenting support for Palestine, despite the death threats, the fears for his family, and the abuse from the far-right Elon Musk, says Francis. An unusually brave man and 100% compassionate human being, he makes me proud to be Scottish. Of course, this week Humza Yousaf's announced he will not be standing as an MSP for the 2026 election. Andy, will I come to you on this? Humza Yousaf bowing out. Francis has him as her politician of the year.
Fine. Yes, fine, Francis. Francis, I think, maybe has a particular view of the situation in the Middle East, which might be influencing her choice of Humza Yousaf as politician of the year. Look, Humza Yousaf's probably not a lot of people's politician of the year this year, to be honest with you.
Is it yours, Andy?
He wouldn't be mine, but not because, I mean, look, the truth is, he inherited a shocking deck of cards, right? I mean, he really, really did. When he was coming in, I mean, he was in the job for a year or so, but the inheritance was very, very challenging. It was a shocking policy inheritance. He had the whole backdrop of the police investigation and everything that had been going on between Salmond and Sturgeon over several years previously. The government was not performing well before he took over and didn't perform well after he took over either. We have to be honest about that too. He didn't do well in the job, but he went into a total hospital pass, to be honest with you.
But Andy, just on that very quickly, I mean, he was the one that got rid of the Butte House Agreement, which we know that you were very favourable to.
Yeah,
so surely that gives him I think a potential claim for politician of the year in your view.
It was absolutely, undoubtedly his finest moment to get rid of. I mean, that was the best service he did to the people of Scotland was to end that disastrous agreement, and for that he should absolutely be applauded.
Geoff, your take on Francis's comments? And, Andy's right. Of course, Francis is considering world affairs in this, which is not invalid. That's fine. That's Francis's own view.
He hit the nail on the head, right? In terms of the position that Humza inherited. And look, we don't shy away in this podcast from saying what we think. I think the reality is that, Nicola Sturgeon's decision to kind of up sticks and leave on a February recess, a Wednesday morning, as I recall, left the party in a bit of disarray. There was then a very feisty leadership contest, and then no sooner had Humza Yousaf taken office, you had the blue forensic tents around Nicola Sturgeon's house, and then you had a public policy realm that was challenging, to say the least. Issues such as gender, the independence referendum being put to the Supreme Court, that's all in a dead end. You had DRS, the deposit return scheme, ill-fated. You had things like alcohol sponsorship, highly protected marine areas. Now, the one thing I'd say to Humza's credit, despite him, and I think one of his biggest strategic errors was calling himself the continuity candidate, he actually cleared the decks of a lot of those policies when you think about it. And so that paved the way for when John Swinney did take over. He didn't have to deal with these tough issues to the same extent that his predecessor did. And so in that sense, I think, he did his successors a real favour. Sadly, I think Humza's time in office, will not be remembered particularly positively. I think that's a bit unfair for the reasons I've outlined, and also because I know him personally, and he's a lot more capable than I think he was allowed to show, given the strictures that he faced. In terms of the international affairs, I think whatever your views, and obviously it's quite a divisive issue on the Middle East just now, you can't deny that Humza spoke passionately, vehemently in favour of what he believed was going on, and he continues to do that to this day. And I respect him for that. I might not always agree with him, but I respect him for that. And I do think that if it looks like he may find some sort of employment in an NGO or something like that going forward, I think he'd be very suited to that, in terms of his future career. But, it's always important to reflect, he had the highest office in the land. That's a real privilege and something that nobody can ever take away from him.
Yeah, sure. I mean, do we really expect Nicola Sturgeon to run as an MSP in 2026? She's kind of hovering there. I think it is February, the kind of deadline. There's no way, is there, that she runs?
Absolutely not.
I think at this point it would be a massive shock if she did.
If she did, yeah, fair. Francis, by the way, goes on to say, my political moment this year was when the UN when the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child became enshrined into Scots law, says Francis. I like this world view from Francis. This is interesting to have this global perspective. Francis says this can now be referred to in areas of poverty, homelessness, health, education, special needs, protection from negative aspects of the internet, mental health, racism, sexism, etc., and allow our children to thrive and be the people of future Scotland so desperately needs, says Francis, who, by the way, I've assumed is female. I'm not sure if that's accurate.
I'm also taking a punt that Francis is not a no-voting Tory.
Francis, you know the number. Get back in touch. 0333 404 6507. Right, and just the last one for now, which I think we'll return to later in the podcast, but I want to mention it's from Fraser, who was listening to last week's pod. He said the line that Anna Sarwar has to await the nod from Sir Keir Starmer is a powerful one. When voting for a government in Edinburgh, why would you want to install a party into power who has to take their lead from London? Both Geoff and Andy make salient points, and it may be that we need to start looking into a situation where unionist parties need to make themselves independent of London to, quote, get rid of the SNP. Fraser says, also, I have to credit my local MSP, Fergus Ewing, for representing us as constituents fiercely against his own party and government around the A9 and A96. To do this can't be easy, but having been an SNP voter and feeling very let down in recent years, I have to say Mr. Ewing's work makes it easier for me to vote for him. What do the guys think of having more MSPs who are willing to be more like Mr. Ewing and less, quote, lobby fodder? Is how Fraser describes it, which actually feeds very nicely into the first sort of big conversation we want to have this week. So bear Fraser's thoughts in mind, and then bear this in mind, because Andy, you went a bit viral this week with a tweet, a post on X that said, the things other countries do, Norway building a 16-mile dual carriageway tunnel, financed by a toll, of course, to speed up rural travel and promote economic growth. It'll be done and dusted in 10 years. Meanwhile, in Scotland, the A9. And you shared a link to the story in the Telegraph about the tunnel in Norway. Andy Maciver, the floor is yours.
It's just an innocent 5 o'clock in the morning tweet. I mean, you know.
I think financed by a toll, of course, suggests there's absolutely nothing innocent about this at all.
I suppose the point I was trying to make, which some people agreed with and some people didn't, is that we have to understand how big transport infrastructure gets funded everywhere else in the world, right? And we also have to understand that we can go on about setting new dates for the A9 all we like. The A9 is not going to be dualled. It's not going to happen unless we change the way that we think about how to fund big infrastructure and how to pay for the ongoing payoff from big infrastructure. So everywhere else in the world, there is some form of private finance, whether that be some sort of private-public partnership or whether it be effectively a loan from the markets. The piece of infrastructure is built and then it is paid off through a toll. That's true for the Faroe Islands tunnels. It's true for this E39 road in Norway, where tunnels are persistently built. There's another tunnel being built just now between Denmark and Germany. I mean, these things are happening all over the world. Ireland is just about to build a brand new 50-mile motorway between Cork and Limerick. It's going to be funded privately and paid off through tolling. So people might not want to pay road tolls. That's fine. I don't really want to pay them either. But if you don't do it that way, you're just not getting the road. So, we talk about the A9 as though it's like some sort of jewel in the crown. It's like just the start of the crown being manufactured. There's the A9, the A96, the A82 and the A83 are crucial to pump storage hydro sites, if nothing else, in the West Highlands. They are not appropriate roads at the moment at all for any kind of level of traffic. The A75 and the A77, which I have to say I have client involvement in those roads as well.
Mm-hmm.
This is a dismal trunk road infrastructure we have in this country. Really awful. And, we're talking about when the A9 be built in 2035 or whatever the latest non-date is. Nothing is going to happen unless we accept the fact that you have to finance it privately and then pay it off. It's not going to happen through the public purse. So we just need to accept that and grow up. And if we say we're not doing that, then that's fine, but you don't get the stuff.
There you go. And that was the gist of the argument on Twitter, but it has become very, very salient this week. If you would like to agree or disagree with Andy, you can WhatsApp us 0333 404 6507. And the reason Fergus Ewing feeds into this conversation, Geoff, is because at topical questions in the Scottish Parliament this week, Fergus Ewing says the lack of dualling of the A96 is a red line for him and that his constituents will be deeply depressed by the failure. He says, I cannot betray my constituents. His question was, he asked us to ask the Scottish Government what its position is on whether the reported delay in the publication of the A96 Corridor Review document 3 months after it was understood to be provided to the Cabinet Secretary for Transport is acceptable. And just in the interest of fairness, Transport Secretary Fiona Hislop saying, the truth is the dualling of the A96 has been progressing in my term. In the last 18 months, we've seen the completion of the statutory requirements of the made orders, etc., etc., etc. It gets a bit sort of jargonese, but she says it's continuing, basically.
Yeah, I'll come to that in a second. I just want to pick up a couple of things Andy said. He mentioned Norway and Ireland. It would be remiss of me not to point out that in the Forbes top 10 richest countries by GDP per capita ranking in 2024, Ireland comes in 4th and Norway comes in 6th. Oh, if Scotland had the same fiscal levers as these independent countries. And
if they allowed Apple to set up shop their HQ, in, for example, as they do in Ireland, and be a part of life, funding massive surpluses,
having the decisions of a fully autonomous, independent country can help you generate economic growth. Now, on A96, I also tweeted about this recently, quite innocuously, actually, and similar to Andy, it did the rounds,
Sorry,
and it tells you, no, not at all. It tells you how important these type of things are to people. Now, I could argue, you can make a strong argument, purely in economic terms, that the A96 is strategically a lot more important to the future economic prosperity of Scotland than the A9. And the reason I say that is because of the ports that are located on the A96 conurbation between Inverness and Aberdein. You've got Cromarty, Invergordon, Ardsair, Buckie, you've got Peterhead, Fraserburgh, and then all the way into Aberdeen. And these are the ports that will be the fulcrum of the green industrialisation of our country if we're going to get this right and do it at pace. And so it would make sense, would it not, to have that corridor dualled to reduce times between them, because you're going to need to get the supply chain to the ports as quickly as possible to ensure that we really do turbocharge this transformation. And so I think it's a strategic economic priority, imperative rather than that we do this. I think the Scottish Government have to outline in the run-up to 2026 clearly how they are going to fund this. To take Andy's point, there has to be a clear programme of investment, not airy-fairy stuff, not we're putting this to consultation, Transport Scotland are doing another review on this particular leg. Just say a lot more detail in terms of their intention to do it. Why? Politically? Because you are going to need to hold on to those seats at SNP, in my opinion. This is where there is a natural SNP constituency traditionally, and you can really tap into that, but you have to give them something. And to the point on Fergus Ewing's contribution yesterday, I thought the language there was telling. Red line. So if that red line is not met in his view, does that mean he's off? You know, that's how I read it, certainly. And I would have been pretty threatened by that. And I tell you what, a Fergus Ewing joining an Alapuff, for example, I'm just shooting the breeze here, but that would be a big deal. A Ewing, not in the SNP, but standing for Alba instead. So I think this is one to watch, definitely. Very interesting.
Yeah. Andy, what do you think of Fergus Ewing's comments? Red line is absolutely standout from him.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think the whole Fergus Ewing thing had the sting taken out of it very significantly when John Swinney and Kate Forbes took over. I think you can fairly see Fergus Ewing as being far more allied to Swinney and Forbes than he would have been to the previous regime. So that kind of put an end to the concept of SNP rebels, to be honest, when John and Kate came in. But Geoff's right. I mean, the language is pretty clear, and Fergus couldn't have been clearer about what he sees as being the essential requirements on road building. To take the final point that was made in that WhatsApp that we got as well, the answer is yes. I think we do need more backbenchers, which in fairness has always been the case at Westminster, but has lately really not been the case at Holyrood at all, across the board, across all parties. We need more backbenchers with a little bit of muscle, to be honest, who are prepared to say what they want to say rather than just towing the line. Far too many people on the payroll or who want to be on the payroll at Holyrood and who have basically said nothing against the hierarchy of their parties at all. So the answer to that one is yes, more of that, please.
Yeah, is there agreement there, Geoff? Because I would say from a kind of an outside kind of perspective, when it comes to news and getting things done via the media, which is kind of where I live most of the time, people need to say things. They need to stand up for what they believe in, like Fergus Ewing does, and that's why he gets attention, and that's why people talk about these issues, and he picks on things that are important, as you say, A96 in his case. If imagine every MSP was going into bat every single week, loudly and proudly for something for their constituents. What a place the Scottish Parliament could become.
Yeah, and you can argue the same for Westminster. I mean, we're going to come on to the WASPI stuff as well, and we're seeing interesting interventions from certain Labour MPs about that decision. I mean, look, I agree entirely. I suppose the only caveat to that is I served in government, and when you're in government, you want to keep your government together as much as possible, and the party of government together. And so I would try and encourage MSPs to toe the line as much as possible. I'm just being honest here, but equally, when they were of our view, and I can think of a number of examples to speak out, that meant, you had to listen, particularly when we're in a minority government, and we had to respond to that, and that does make better decision making, actually. So yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. From this wonderful position of not being in politics anymore.
but it's good to hear all the perspectives, isn't it, on that? I just wanted to mention as well on infrastructure and on economic growth, and actually on a subject that's close to this podcast's heart, of course, energy. This is from Energy Voice. Delays in approving the mammoth Berwick Bank offshore wind farm are putting potentially billions of pounds of investment and thousands of jobs at risk. This is a warning from our friends at the Aberdein and Grampian Chamber of Commerce, marking the 2-year anniversary of the submission of the project's planning application, claiming it's not an anniversary the Scottish Government should be proud of. Now, for clarity, the application went in 2022, and the project is still awaiting a decision, and it is from Scottish ministers, Geoff. That's right, isn't it, in terms of who is responsible?
Yeah, look, so just very briefly on this, because I know we've got things to cover, but in the budget, in fairness to the Scottish Government, they announced an offshore wind planning hub that will be located in Aberdein, and my understanding is that they're going to put the relevant officials from Nature Crown Estate Scotland, from Marine Scotland and the Scottish Government Offshore Wind Directorate under one roof to try and simplify and accelerate the process from planning and consenting for these projects, getting them available so that they can be commercially invested in. Now, that is really, really welcome, in fairness, but it is in a hugely arduous process right now. All of those agencies have to be consulted on each stage. I'm trying to make this as simple as possible of the planning application, and then they go back and then back and forth. Surely there's a way this can be done concurrently. and they identify those projects that are of huge significance to our economy, but also in terms of our ability to get to net zero quickly and ensure that we don't lose out and maintain our position as potential global leaders in particularly offshore wind. So it's not acceptable, quite frankly. Then we need to do something about it. The noises coming from the Scottish Government are good. They're receptive to that, but it needs to be done quicker.
Mm-hmm. Andy?
Look, we've given this new government under John Swinney and Kate Forbes credit where it's due over the last 6 months or so. I think the business environment is better. I think the foundations are there for things to get significantly better than they were. The budget was decent. I think broadly speaking, we've given them a fair crack at the whip, and I think we've given credit where it's due, and it is due in many areas. But it's not due here. This is a farce. You cannot stand up there and say we are a global leader in this area of offshore wind and then sit on your backside for 2 years, failing to get the biggest jewel in the crown underway and going. The signal it sends to the investment world is absolutely hopeless. There is no certainty given. There is no indication to the rest of the world that we are the place to be when it comes to offshore wind. Now, there will be all sorts of reasons the government will give, perceptional reasons and regulatory reasons why this has been held up here and this has been held up there and all that. You just have to get it done. If you want to play with the big boys, you just get these things done. This has now gone on long enough, and if you want to send the signal that you are a player in this and that you are one of the leaders of the world when it comes to offshore wind, you've got to just get this done, or you look like idiots, and you deserve to look like idiots as well.
Yeah. And just one very quick thing on top of that. The point here is it's not just for the sake of saying that you've got them consented. It's the point about the ability to invest in them. So we have a supply chain, I've mentioned it many times before, the largest cluster of energy supply chain companies anywhere in the UK are based in and around the northeast of Scotland. They are ready to invest, they want to diversify, but there is nothing to invest in right now. They need these projects available. And then you can attract the high value manufacturers, the moorings, the anchoring, the cables that are required for these massive installations. And so it's kind of cart before horse. That's the point here. We need to get going with this stuff so that companies, before they are attracted elsewhere, because I say it all the time, oil and gas in other countries is going like the clappers, not here, for reasons that we've well rehearsed on this podcast. You have to create the economic opportunity for these businesses to invest, and right now it's just not there because we're not getting these projects consented and commercially available quick enough.
Thanks, guys. We're on our way to talk about the WASPI Women decision from the UK government. Just on the way to that, though, MSPs are going to be barred from sitting as MPs or members of the House of Lords. The Scottish Parliament has voted in favour of plans to ban dual mandate. All parties unanimously supported banning members from holding both roles at the same time as part of an amendment to electoral reform legislation. You've heard us on this podcast discussing Stephen Flynn when he announced his intention to sit in both parliaments ahead of the 2026 Holyrood election. The SNP Westminster leader, he then sort of backtracked from that. Shock, the Scottish Government's going to bring forward a public consultation on this proposal early next year. Make a decision and get it done. Andy, what do you make of the vote? I mean, unanimous backing, cross-party support. This is gonna come to an end.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I've got mixed views on it because I don't have any objection to that being the rule. If that's the rule, that's the rule. I mean, you could argue that it should have been the rule 25 years ago rather than just bringing it in now. But if that's the rule, that's the rule. I think we might need to be clearer on why that's the rule, right? And what the motivations were for bringing this in so quickly. My own view on it remains as it always has been. I want the best people that Scottish politics has in Holyrood. I don't really want them in Westminster. I think we need them in Holyrood. And it wouldn't bother me that much if they were also MPs at the same time, as long as they were here. However, if this is the rule, then this is the rule, and I'm not going to die in a ditch over it, to be honest.
Well, I think the motivation point's a good one, isn't it? Because Stephen Flynn is the one who's brought this to a head. This is a reaction to Stephen Flynn, Geoff.
Yeah, the Flynn Act. Infamy, they've all got it, infamy. I mean, the interesting thing here is, and what I need to read this a lot closer. I haven't had a chance to yet. Does this now suggest that you can at no point be both an MSP and an MP at the same time? I think it does. And so therefore, if Stephen Flynn is to stand for Aberdeen South and Holyrood, he has to resign his seat and cause a by-election. This is going to be quite tricky. So if he's to do that, look out for some fireworks in the northeast coming up. You know, I just wondered if there could be a nuance to the procedure that says, as long as you indicate you are going to resign your seat should you be successful, that's the way around it, you know, potentially. Because to Andy's point, you want the best people in Holyrood, and I quite like the idea of MPs coming back to be MSPs as opposed to the other way around. I think that enhances our parliament potentially. So we'll wait and see what happens with this one, but could be fireworks in the northeast before long.
Well, yeah,
that's the danger as well, though, right? Is that you don't want to negatively change somebody's thought process around this. If you've got an MP at Westminster who thinks I might want to be an MSP, but doesn't particularly want to lose their job, and if they can't at least hedge, you know, if they can't sit on both horses at least for a while, then there might be people off. So it went under the radar a bit because of the Stephen Flynn stuff. But Stephen Gethin's a very, very good SNP MP who I would love to see at Holyrood also indicated he wanted to come to Holyrood. Now, for Stephen Gethin's and potentially other Labour people who I think would be useful as well, are they sitting there thinking, well, I might have given it a go, but I don't want to resign my seat at Westminster and then lose the Holyrood election and be left with nothing? That doesn't actually do us any particular good. So they do need to be wary of unintended consequences here as well.
Isn't there also the point that the SNP has just created a really hostile welcome for Stephen Flynn should he be successful and become an MSP, that actually, in direct response to his plan to try to get there, they have enacted new legislation? How does he compute that? They don't want him there.
Yeah, that's one interpretation, Calum. I think maybe those around Stephen Flynn might be a little bit put out just now. I don't know. Actually, I must speak to him and find out what his views on this and if he's going to stand for Holyrood. Yeah, just the laws of unintended consequences. Andy's just said it. You know, I think we all accept if there's a rule, great. That's clarity now. Going forward, and we know what the situation is. I just wonder if there can be some flexibility to it because. You know, at the end of the day, you know, in Stephen's instance, he's got 2 kids as well. And it's you know, he needs to have a salary to help his kids, and yet he wants to come back to Holyrood because he believes his talents can be used there. Some may disagree with that, but he views that. And so is there the opportunity for him to do that without losing his job, essentially, if I'm being unemployed for a period? I don't know. I think there's more to this than, you know, meets the eye. It's not as obvious as it would first seem.
Let's go on to discuss the WASPI Women finally on the podcast today, because even Scotland's front pages are absolutely brutal on this. Scottish Daily Mail: as ministers refuse compensation for 3.8 million WASPI women hit by pension age changes, despite a string of firm promises to help. Betrayal that proves Labour cynically said anything to get elected. The National front page: WASPI shame. Starmer and Sarwar under fire as pensions women to get no payouts. Labour minister suggests Scotland should come up with the cash. The Scottish Daily Express: Labour have betrayed our OAPs time after time. The Scotsman: Labour slated for betrayal over pension compensation. The Times in Scotland: Labour MPs rebel over new blow to pensioners. Goodness me, Andy, this is a relentless hammering for Labour over their decision not to give any compensation to the Women Against State Pension Inequality, the WASPI Women, who say that women born in the 1950s weren't properly told that their state pension age would rise from 60 to 65. It's now 66. Those plans were first announced in the 1990s, and then they were sped up in the 2011 Pensions Act. There had been a recommendation from a parliamentary ombudsman of compensation of between £1,000 and £2,950. Yesterday, though, the UK government said the £10.5 billion cost would not be fair or proportionate to taxpayers. Cue a string of old tweets, interviews, comments, campaign pictures with Labour MPs and MSPs who said they would be backing the WASPI Women campaign. How are you untangling all of this, and particularly in a Scottish context, where Anna Sarwar has once again been tied to this decision, sure by his own comments in the past, but even just by virtue of being a member of the Labour Party?
just when it was all going so well for Starmer, he nailed the national insurance rise, the farmers are happy. I mean, everything was going...
The OAPs are already cold.
Everything was going swimmingly, and then he, snatches defeat from the jaws of victory with Waspies. I suppose the overarching thing about this, in all fairness, is that every opposition thinks this is a very obvious and easy thing to do. And every government doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a big difference. And of course, they're getting all the quotes drummed up from before they were in government and what they said they would do and all that sort of thing. It is, when you are in government, things look a lot different to how they look when you are in opposition. Liz Kendall is right. It's a significant amount of money. But the difficulty is, sometimes when everybody accepts that there has been an injustice against one particular group, pretty large group, in this case, women. And you say and you say and you say and you say you're going to do something about it, and then you don't. It becomes just extremely difficult. Much as you can understand that government is a difficult thing to do, it just becomes very difficult to have any credibility. And it is layered on top of those other issues I've been talking about. It's layered on top of winter fuel. It's layered on top of two-child cap. It's layered on top of national insurance, which, by the way, is the worst of all of it, but that's a different story. And layered on top of inheritance tax for farmers. And, politically, it's a shocker, let's be honest. But again, it's a political shocker in the views of Starmer and Liz Kendall, which is 4.5 years away from their election. The problem for Anas Sarwar is it's a political shocker for him, and it's just over a year away from his. So yet again, he's the one who's under the bus here.
Yeah. Geoff, just before you come in, I just want to read John Swinney's comments on this. People in Scotland were promised change. Yet again, this Labour government is making the same mistakes as the former Tory government. This is not just a shameful episode for the UK government, it's yet another serious embarrassment for the Labour leadership in Scotland. The choice for Scottish Labour is, will they do the right thing and stand up for older people in Scotland, or will they stand up for the Prime Minister? And the BBC News copy on this, everybody is pointing to these comments, but I'll read it from here. That Anas Sarwar, during his unsuccessful leadership bid in 2017, promised that WASPI women would receive the justice they deserve. That's the quote, if he led the party.
Yeah, John Swinney must be rubbing his hands purely in a political sense. It's obviously a very serious issue, but, can't believe his luck at what Labour are doing just now. The SNP were potentially dead and buried a matter of months ago. And yes, you can argue that there's been a steadying of the ship and all the rest of it, but largely because of the actions of his UK colleagues. Anas Sarwar finds him well and truly behind the 8 ball here, and I'm not sure he'll be viewing 2026 with much relish as things stand as we speak today. Couple of things. I don't want to add to anything that Andy said because everything he says is right, particularly in terms of the 4.5 years to get things right. Versus the year and a half for Holyrood. I think that's the most relevant point here. But trust is hard won in politics, but it's easily lost. And, I can't help escape for all these different policy interventions they've made that they're losing the trust of the people. And if you're in a position like that, it's very hard to make the ground back. It really is. But particularly for Anas Sarwar, who's trying to lead the party into an election contest in 15 months' time. What does he say to this? It was completely undermining his approach. And I just think that, we talked about it previously on this podcast. Starmer needs to give him something. And a major policy intervention, something that he can grab onto and say, I'm delivering this. It has been my lobbying of the Prime Minister's delivered this and campaign on it. And I don't know what that is right now, guys, because it seems to me that the Labour Party at the UK level are hell-bent on kind of disillusioning, if that's a word, almost all key core demographics they need. Older people turn out to vote. We've got the WASPI decision. We've got winter fuel pay allowances, businesses, tax on jobs, working people, for the NIC stuff, the farmers stuff. Regardless of the issue at hand, the perception is that Labour are giving them a bit of a going over right. It's absolutely extraordinary. Keir Starmer's on -34 approval rating. -34 approval rating according to Ipsos this week. That is extraordinary turnaround from somebody that just led his party to government a few months ago. Unbelievable.
The Scottish Labour social justice spokesperson, excuse me, Paul O'Kane said...
Are you on the radio?
Can you believe that I talk for a living? I can't. Paul O'Kane said, many will be disappointed that no compensation is being offered to the thousands of women impacted by the Tory decision to raise their pension age without proper notice. Of course, the UK government should be focused on fixing the economic mess it inherited, but in recognising this injustice, we would hope to have seen a compromise position that would have allowed for some form of compensation for the WASPI women most in need from this long-running failure. Is that leaving the door ajar for some sort of Anas Sarwar offer to the WASPI women ahead of 2026? Make me First Minister and the WASPI women most in need will get something? I don't know.
It's a tough sell, Calum. It's a tough sell on that basis. But you know, I just remember the Liberal Democrats going into coalition in 2010, and all their candidates had been getting pictures with students and saying they were going to get rid of tuition fees. Now, you can argue for the Liberals, they had a bit of a get out because they had to enter a coalition. You know, they weren't going into government as a majority on their own. But that was absolutely damning. It's the one thing people remembered from the Liberal Democrats. It had a huge impact on their credibility. And, you know, Labour got to watch that this doesn't happen. This issue does not turn into that type of totemic issue that it did for the Liberal Democrats. That's what it reminded me of when I saw it yesterday. And to your point, you just do wonder, could they not have fudged it a bit and said, look, we will look at the phased delivery of this compensation over the term of the Parliament. So you're not spending £10 billion up front. Is there not even a commitment there politically they could have hung their coats on to give them a bit of a get out, you know?
Yeah.
Just one more thing from me. I'm not going to bleat on about this because I'm not sure yet that I'm right about it and I haven't got it fully formed in my head. But I did say that we might be entering an era where association with a party at Westminster, you know, the kind of Scottish arm of a Westminster party model, might just be defunct now. You know, I used to think it was a Tory problem. I now think it might be a unionist problem generally. You know, Westminster is so present in Scottish politics all the time that when something like this happens with a Labour government at Westminster, the winds are too strong, and it doesn't matter how big and strong Anas Sarwar is, he still gets blown over. And this is just a long-term structural problem now for unionist parties when their bosses are in power at Westminster. It makes things really, really hard for them, and it makes things really, really easy for the SNP. And as I said, you know, maybe they've rigged this whole devolution settlement against themselves.
Just a very quick thought on that. You know, I was reflecting on Andy's comments, and I think he makes a very strong point. It could all have been different, of course, had Keir Starmer been off that barnstormer, and then Anas Sarwar could have ridden his coattails to success in 2026. But I always remember us taking office in 2007, and, you know, was there a scunner factor with the Labour Party at Holyrood? Yes, there was. But not as nearly as much as there was with, you know, Blair and Brown at that point at Westminster, you know, particularly in the wake of the, you know, Iraq War and the dodgy dossier and all this sort of stuff. And, you know, the point's a good one from Andy. You know, folk may just look at Starmer, Reeves, Rain, all this and just go, do you know what? I'm just not backing you, son. I can't, you know, I just can't do it on that basis, not particularly on Anas Sarwar at all. You can see that situation. We've got a long way to go, guys. So it's early doors, but the signs are not good, I would say, for Labour.
Big year coming up on this podcast next year, of course, with a year to go to the Holyrood election. We've just done this on the 18th of December. Believe it or not, we're going to drop in a special Christmas episode into your podcast feed before Christmas Day, so you can still enjoy the day as well. So that'll be with you.
To ruin a Christmas.
To have a crap Christmas.
With Holyrood Sources.
Courtesy of Holyrood Sources. So yes, listen out for that. Thank you so much for listening this week. Find us on YouTube. Send us your WhatsApps. We love having you as part of the podcast as well. And we will talk to you once more before Christmas.